This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.
In the untouched regions of the forest, the kōkako runs through the treetops feeding on leaves, flowers and fruit. The South Island kōkako, with its distinctive orange wattles at the base of the bill, hasn't been sighted in many years and may be extinct. A situation the blue-wattled bird of the North Island may find itself in unless its habitat is preserved. Its delightful call includes a variety of rich organ and bell-like notes.
Community or chaos? We can construct and nurture community or fall into chaos. Over the next hour, Marvin Hubbard hosts conversations toward creating a fairer, more equal society.
Community or Chaos is made possible with the support of Quakers Aotearoa. You'll find them online at quaker.org.nz.
Good morning, friends. We're talking with Stephen Zunes on Community or Chaos. Stephen's a professor of international relations at the University of San Francisco, specializing in Middle Eastern politics, U.S. foreign policy, and strategic nonviolent action. Well, welcome to Community and Chaos. Stephen.
Good to be with you again.
Could you, I think we'll start right into the subject matter. We'll be talking about the Middle East in the beginning. Could you talk about why the United States and Israel attacked Iran, and in particular, why the United States committed itself to this war?
Basically, they saw an opportunity that Iran has never been weaker with the horrific repression that came down against the pro-democracy protests a couple of months ago. They have lost more and more of the support of the Iranian people. Their only state ally in the region, the Assad regime, was overthrown about a year and a half ago in a popular uprising, and the two most important major armed groups, allies, Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Houthis in Yemen, have been severely damaged in the past couple of years of fighting, and so they seem to think that maybe the regime was vulnerable and we could not knock them off, or not knock them off, just turn them into a failed state and just damage them. So they will no longer be a deterrent to the hegemonic desires of Netanyahu and Trump.
Now, is that part of that desires? I mean, part of the consequences of this is, well, America now, the United States now controls Venezuela's oil, or at least they believe they are. And this attack on Iran, they could hope to control the oil there. Whatever happens, as long as the fighting is going on seriously, this strait where all the oil goes through to places like New Zealand and China are held up or blocked indefinitely. Do you think this is also part of the strategy about China?
I don't think they thought it through that much. I mean, it is actually because of all the other ramifications. That is, gas prices are soaring in the United States, and that's a bad thing in an election year. That it has caused the stock markets to decline, and fears of a global recession, which is often the case when oil prices get super high. So I don't think that the cost benefit analysis, if you will, of hurting China in certain ways really are a major factor here.
Well, none of it really, to my way of thinking, in the long run, it can't be good for for Israel in the long run, can it?
Yeah, of course not. I mean, it just makes Israel more and more a pariah state. Its links to U.S. imperialism are even stronger. It will make the idea of normalization by certain neighboring countries even less likely. That and indeed it can often these sorts of things that we've seen and some of Israel's previous violent wars ends up encouraging extremists that could come back and haunt Israel later.
We've had enough lessons beginning with what Israel's been done, but also Iraq, that it hasn't ended well, particularly. And can Israel really trust the United States and Trump to be their friend if it happens to be inconvenient?
Well, I guess what we're seeing already is this a big push, particularly in some of the more right-wing isolationist elements in the United States, but even some elements of the left as well, that are saying, "Oh, it's all Netanyahu's fault. He pressured Trump into this." And and yes, Israel has been lobbying for a major war on Iran for many years, but to act like Trump is a puppet and was it's total nonsense. I mean, Trump's nobody's puppet. Yes, Israel pushed, but it was an open door.
But what I mean is that
I really think that the U.S. would invade it anyway. So going to your question about how it hurts Israel in the long term, so what it does is it's going to encourage. It's already encouraging all sorts of anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. You can go back to the Dreyfus affair after the Franco-Prussian War. You can look at the pushback after the disaster in Iraq. It's the Jews.
That scares the hell out of me, to be honest, personally.
Yeah, exactly. And already you're seeing this kind of scapegoating.
I mean, this
going on, and
it's like saying this socialism is all like Russian. Like the Russian Revolution.
Right. And I think it's so I think this I think there's a lot of emphasis on the Israeli pressure, and even the U.S. Secretary of State, said, implied that we had to attack first because Israel was going to attack, and then Iran would retaliate against us, as if the U.S. could not say to Israel, as it said in many other occasions, well, if you do something provocative that's going to hurt our interests, we'll cut off all military aid.
The other thing that Israel isn't facing is that the United States may not, in the intermediate future, be as dependable an ally as they were under Biden and all the governments before Biden. That they can't assume because they've got the go-ahead to attack Iran, that if things don't work out for them, they're going to have the backing of the United States. And they're losing any other allies and sympathy they may have.
Yeah, that's possible. And what's really striking is that the big shift in opinion in the Democratic Party regarding Israel. For the first time, Israel used to be the darling of the Democratic Party, a darling of the liberal establishment. It was politically very difficult for any Democratic politician to speak out against Israeli policies, but things have shifted so dramatically now. Just to give you an idea, a recent poll showed that Democrats now sympathize more with the Palestinians than with the Israelis by a margin of 65% to 17%. That is huge. And just the other day, Gavin Newsom, the very centrist, very establishment Democratic governor of California, who many people see as the front runner, for the 2028 Democratic Party nomination for president, referred to Israel as an apartheid state and said we should condition military aid. And when somebody as establishment mainstream as Newsom feels obliged to say that, there's been a big shift. And if there is a Democratic president, Israel's no longer, depending on who it is, but the likelihood is that it's going to be someone who's no longer willing to give them a blank check, as did Biden and other previous presidents.
Under many people concerned about politics and international law in New Zealand believe that this attack's totally illegal under international law. And
clear violation of the United Nations Charter,
including the assassination of heads of states. Can you talk about this and what the likely results are? It becomes normal to attack heads of states, and attacks like this in Venezuela are all right. What happens beyond this?
So the war, first of all, the war itself the war itself is illegal because the United Nations Charter only allows for a military force in self-defense of an armed attack, and clearly this is not the case here. Now, there's something in customary international law. Oh yeah, or in defense of armed attack, or the United Nations Security Council authorizes it. There's something in customary international law that allows for preemptive war, but that's only of an imminent threat, such as, you see somebody loading missiles into launchers. You see soldiers massing on the border, about to invade. Clearly, this wasn't the case either. One Republican senator went as far as to say, Iran's been an imminent threat for 47 years, apparently not knowledgeable of the definition. Dictionary definition of imminent, but so the war itself is illegal. The assassination of heads of state is generally considered illegal. International.
There's reason for this, isn't there?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Obviously, it would. Countries should start killing their leaders back and forth. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights makes it very, very clear. In fact, in U.S. law, the Executive Order 12333 was, came in after the revelations in the 1970s about CIA efforts to assassinate Fidel Castro and the like. And then you have the incident with the unarmed Iranian naval vessel that was invited to take part in these kind of ceremonial parades and Navy exercises by the Indian government, and they were returning from that in international waters. Again, they were completely unarmed, and the United States blew it up and refused to rescue the sailors who were treading water. That despite the international maritime law requiring that in such situations there would be a good faith effort to rescue people. There are all sorts of major violations of international law here.
Doesn't this invite chaos and anarchy? And
of course, and what's disturbing, but what's disturbing about it is that previous administrations have often done some very furious contortions to justify violations of international legal norms, but the current U.S. Secretary of Defense, Exeth, basically says, the Fourth Geneva Convention does no longer apply. We're just not going to pay any attention to them. We don't no longer have rules of engagement. This is about, and we're just going to do whatever the hell we want. And this is absolute war. And again, this is how the United States has really become an outlaw nation, and it's disturbing because the United States was the architect of many of the basic, what we now consider laws of war, the architect and the basic principles of international law and the drafting of the UN Charter, as the principal ally in World War II. The United States was committed to building some semblance of international order in response to the atrocities and war crimes committed by Nazi Germany and the Italian fascist and the Japanese imperialists. But now the U.S. government is really on record saying no, that's no longer that's in the past. We're not bound by those things anymore, and we'll do whatever the hell we want.
And what's happening with Gaza and the Palestinians?
Well, Israel continues periodic airstrikes, again with the primary victims being civilians. They have also violated the ceasefire by reimposing the blockade. There's virtually no food and medicine coming in. They're not allowing people to leave for urgent medical care, as they were doing at least for a time, in limited numbers. Meanwhile, on the West Bank, settler violence is increasing. Scores of Palestinians are being killed. Another American teenager was gunned down trying to protect the sheep that the village where his family was from, from being rounded up by settlers. Orchards and vineyards continue to be destroyed. Homes continue to be bulldozed, and these settler militia are operating with impunity without being interfered, and sometimes directly supported by Israeli troops. We have a situation comparable, really, to El Salvador in the 1980s in terms of these death squads, with cooperation by a far-right U.S.-backed government. And meanwhile, in Lebanon, the bombing is among the intense it's been. Entire apartment blocks, hotels, other major buildings in Beirut have been struck. Over 700,000 people have been forced to leave because of the Israeli bombardment. There was a little town in the south of Lebanon, a hillside town that I actually visited about a dozen years ago. That was named Kfar Kila, which they basically systematically blown up every building in the town. They also ended up killing the a Maronite priest, parish priest in a village.
Phil, I don't know what to say about the Israeli establishment or Trump. It's beyond what I can say, certainly over the air. I'm not feeling terribly Quakerly at the moment, I'm afraid. It seems extraordinarily inhuman and careless. I can't hear you.
Israel would not be able to get away with this if they were not being provided the weapons by the United States, if they weren't being protected from international accountability by the use of the veto in the United Nations Security Council. I think it's important to recognize that while it's certainly not making any excuses for Israel's behavior, that any country in a hostile region that was given this kind of umbrella, this kind of unconditional support from the world's greatest superpower, would likely behave in the same manner. I mean, the reason Israelis keep voting for these far-right governments is there are no consequences to their outrageous behavior. Any other country that elected a far-right government that did this kind of things would find their nation being set upon by strict international sanctions, which would cause all sorts of economic problems and isolation and all sorts of other terrible things, and they'd be forced to change. I mean, look at what happened to white minority rule in South Africa, for example. I mean, everybody thought that would last forever, and that the white South Africans were just so racist and so whatever, they would never change. But it got to the point where they said, the economy is not going to survive. We can't deal with this isolation anymore. We're going to have to legalize the ANC, release Nelson Mandela, and negotiate for majority rule. And if the United States is willing to, and the international community as a whole, were willing to put the same kind of pressure on Israel, they wouldn't be doing this stuff anymore.
It appears to me that the United States administration is a co-defendant and co-author of this tragedy, both in Iran and Gaza and the West Bank.
Yes, I know, no question about it. I mean, that's a theme that I have, pushed again and again. This is why I also kind of push back on this tail wagging the dog kind of thing, because in the rare cases where the U.S. administration has said no to Israel, they've been able to say no, and it forced Israel to change its behavior. And this is I've been concerned that a lot of allies of the United States, including New Zealand, have not been clear enough that allowing this kind of thing to continue and not taking a firm stand about such gross violations is wrong and is damaging.
This kind of action dehumanizes all of us. We all pay for this.
Yeah, very much so. And this idea, that we wonder why the people talk about these extremist Islamic groups and that kind of thing, and all the terrible things that they're doing, as if there's something inherent within Islam that makes people this way or whatever. But it is a reaction to these kinds of policies. I mean, after the 9/11 attacks, the old, why do they hate us? And we heard things like, because they hate our freedom, they hate our democracy, they hate we have women's rights, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if that was true, why didn't they attack Sweden or New Zealand or other countries that have democracy and freedom of religion and women's rights and that kind of thing? They attacked the United States because we are seen as an imperialist power that continually engages in the kind of actions that end up causing enormous suffering and massive deaths in the Islamic world.
What's going on here, particularly if Iran does fall apart, won't it make the Middle East, the entire Middle East and Turkey, and in the long run, Europe, less safe?
Oh, certainly. I
think in Syria and Turkey,
Yeah. I mean, let's put it this way. If the United States, with all its resources at its disposal, by far the largest economy in the world, by far the largest military in the world, with all these diplomatic mechanisms, if we refuse to play by the rules, why should anybody else? Why should oppressed peoples abide by certain rules and resisting the manifestations of crimes committed by the United States and its allies? And as long as so many of the other Western industrialized countries, while probably not happy with the U.S. action, given its given its repercussions, don't more forcibly speak out, or are much more quicker to criticize Iranian retaliation than the ones who started the war and have killed far more people. What does that say about the West in general?
They don't want Greenland or Denmark attacked, but very few of the allies, except for Spain, were very critical about this attack on Iran, including the assassination of Iran's leaders. Mark Carney in Canada, after talking about the need for international law and so on, they seemed to think that was all right somehow.
Yes. And I mean, he's backtracked a little bit in the face of public uproar, but again, and that's particularly disappointing in Canada, actually, because Canada, at least of the G7 countries, has generally been the best one in terms of raising concerns about international law overall. I mean, this goes back to the days of Lester Pearson back in the 1960s and the like, but it has unfortunately not lived up to that legacy, even under a liberal government.
Isn't it quite possible that many people particularly people in Iran, though they might really dislike their government and want to change, an attack like this might make them more patriotic?
Oh, yeah, very much so. I mean, very much around rallying around the flag effect. We saw this even last summer's war, and even more so. I mean, yes, there are people who initially celebrated the killing of the hated cleric Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, but they've seen him replaced by his equally hardline son. And they're seeing a lot of innocent civilians being killed. And it just underscores, that the tendency that people are not going to rise up when they're being bombed. I happen to work with the young Serbs who, led the Otpor movement against the Milosevic regime in Serbia and former Yugoslavia, and they were totally against the NATO bombing of their country in 1999. They believe it set back their movement. People who are out protesting Milosevic one week or out the next week protesting NATO. And they eventually did win. Eventually they were able to overthrow Milosevic. But they've emphasized this fact. And when I was in Iran a few years ago, the opposition to the regime was palpable. But I didn't hear anybody, calling for war. And they recognized it would just be an excuse for the regime to crack down even further, and would make it impossible for any real change to take place.
How is democracy going in the United States at the moment?
It's still very much under attack, and but I think there's an important link here in that the one of the most clear-cut cases, clear-cut parts of the Constitution regarding executive versus legislative power is in the authority to make war. It's in Article 1 of the Constitution that only Congress can authorize military force. Now, the president also has to be the commander-in-chief. And of course, that came back from the idea that, back in the late 1700s, let's say the U.S. was attacked and Congress wasn't in session, it would take weeks for people to get on their horse and buggies and make it to the nation's capital to vote. So in a defensive war and under attack, the president can could order troops into combat. But any offensive war, any war of choice, absolutely had to be in the hands of Congress. There have been violations of that, but they are usually kind of quick in and out kind of things like Grenada, Panama, Venezuela, and the like. But even George W. Bush, he went to Congress to get authorization before the invasion of Iraq. He went to great effort to convince Americans that was necessary. Now, it was full of lies. These are later proven false. In fact, many of us pointed out that they were lies at the time. But at least he went to that effort. in a State of the Union speech, just a few weeks before the invasion. He spent almost half of it trying to make the case for war. Whereas Trump, in his State of the Union speech just a few weeks ago, it was the longest State of the Union speech in U.S. history, like an hour and 48 minutes. He spent less than 3 minutes talking about Iran. It was very vague. It's like he didn't care what Congress thought. He didn't care what the American people thought. And this is just in so many other ways, everything from dispatching armed forces into American cities to spending money that Congress never allocated, to refusing to spend money that Congress did allocate. I mean, you could go down the list. He is acting as an authoritarian, and yet Congress was with a Republican majority in both houses refused to enact the War Powers Act, which is an effort in 1973 with the legacy of Vietnam to try to constrain presidential war-making authority more in line with the Constitution. So, I think this, in certain ways, this is people have been talking about in terms of a constitutional crisis and the growing authoritarianism in the United States. But I think in many respects, this war on Iran, which is the largest by far a U.S. military operation that has ever taken place without the consent of Congress, may be the single biggest threat yet.
If this war is going on in November, how will that affect what Trump will do? How he handles it?
Well, already it's having a negative impact. And what's striking about this, Marvin, is that even in very controversial wars in American history, such as take the Iraq invasion, that was obviously very, very controversial in the lead up. There were massive demonstrations. Public opinion was divided. When the war actually got underway, a solid majority of Americans supported it, just because they believe, well, we're in it, we might as well support it. We need to support our troops, et cetera. And in Iraq, as in other wars, the support started to dissipate when Americans started coming home in body bags, when the aims of the war were appearing more and more elusive, when there appeared to be no end in sight. But and eventually they ended up having only minority support, and forced the U.S. troops to withdraw or otherwise end the conflict. But this is the first war that I know where the majority of Americans have opposed it from the outset. Prior to the war, only 21% supported going to war with Iran. It jumped up to, depending on the poll, 32 to 36%. But that's still a pretty tiny minority, especially when you say 60% are outright against it. So, and this is going to only, continue. I mean, they'll get less popular, again, as the war tends to drag on. And obviously people are horrified at the growing civilian death toll, and the failure to really to overthrow the regime, and the shifting justifications, but also, of course, the economic influence. With petrol prices growing dramatically, and just a reminder to your listeners that Americans, more than probably any other nation, are very dependent on private automobiles to get anywhere. But when there is these kinds of high petroleum prices can have a ripple effect in many other ways of the economy, because petroleum is used from everything from plastics to fertilizer and the like. And with 20% of the world's oil bottled up in the Persian Gulf right now, it's going to, this could even trigger a global recession.
Well, it's certainly not
And
doing New
there-
Zealand's economy any good.
Exactly. You folks are even more vulnerable in many cases. I mean, the U.S. can rely on, shale oil and
Now they can rely on
and
some
other things, but
Venezuela even.
yeah. But yes, this is but still, it is not. And of course, the cost of the war itself is practically $1 billion a day, and that and especially when there are all these cutbacks to many popular social programs, this is not going to reflect good on the administration either. And I want to underscore the fact that Trump got elected in large part because he ran to the left of his Democratic opponents on foreign policy, saying, I'm not going to get us in this endless war. Hillary Clinton was a big hawk, supporter of the Iraq War and everything, and the Afghanistan war and intervention in Libya. And he's saying, no, I'll keep us out of these Middle Eastern wars. I'll bring the troops home, America first. Indeed, that's a major reason, one of the major reasons that the white working class voters moved from their traditionally Democratic positions to supporting Trump. So he may lose this key swing electorate, or at least Republicans will, in the midterm elections in November.
Have you seen evidence that the Democratic Party has learned how to connect and get the support of rural voters?
It's still very hard. I mean, they keep believing this myth that being centrist, being moderate, getting non-Trump Republicans to endorse them is the way to win. But that is just making them look more and more like the establishment, and Trump more and more the alternative. Meanwhile, they've alienated much of the party's base, by their pro-corporate policies, by their refusing to go in a more social democratic direction, as polls show. Not just most Democrats, but most Americans would like to see them go. The support by Biden and the party and Harris and the party leadership, Netanyahu and the genocidal war on Gaza alienated a huge block of Democrats. That probably made the difference in the 2024 election alone. So they seem to be really slow in getting the memo here. In fact, there's a lot of publicity put in a major autopsy by the Democratic Party as to why they lost, and when it was completed, the leadership decided to keep it secret because they were apparently going to be too embarrassed at the findings that it would underscore that they do indeed need to move to the left. They do indeed need to be willing to stop supporting Netanyahu and other policies that the party establishment simply does not want to do.
So they're burying it.
Yeah, exactly.
What do you think? Can you comment on James Tarlico's win in Texas primaries for the senatorship?
Yeah, well, there are two Democrats running for the Senate nomination in Texas. Both were pretty progressive. Some people are disappointed that he won because his challenger was a black woman congressman who was just a really feisty and a champion of resistance against the Trump administration. And a lot of people saw it, yet another case of a less experienced, younger, white male besting a well-qualified, experienced woman of color. But in certain ways, Tallarico was at least as progressive. And I think what makes him a particularly strong candidate in certain ways is that he is a devout Christian, but he's a seminarian, in fact. But he is one who really takes seriously the social gospel and the social justice message of Christianity. And he is openly challenging the so-called prosperity gospel and the Christian nationalism that he associated with the right-wing fundamentalist elements of Protestantism. And so, many people believe that he actually has a much stronger chance of defeating the Republican nominee in November. We don't know who the Republican nominee is yet because there's a runoff, and the incumbent Republican, who's quite conservative but is seen more as establishment, is being challenged by the current general, who has been indicted for multiple crimes. He was impeached by the House, but the Senate narrowly refused to convict him. And he's been up the wazoo with all sorts of personal and financial scandals. He is just a really extreme, bigoted wacko in a lot of ways. And if he gets the nomination, I think Tallarico would have to be considered the favorite. And this is in a state which hasn't elected a Democrat to statewide office for more than 30 years.
So how do you see the elections for the House of Representatives and the Senate in the midterms?
I think that the House is almost certainly going to get a Democratic majority. A generic polling shows the Democrats with a major lead. We are seeing in various special elections shifts of 20 or even 30 points in districts that and precinct and areas that went for Trump in November 2024 to the Democrat, and we're even seeing this in local races and for state legislatures and things like that, not just for the House. So looks like there could be a major Democratic shift. It's possible even the Senate, though less likely, can go Democratic as well. And this is one reason there's a lot of concern about the voter repression that the Trump administration is having, trying. There's fear that Trump could declare some kind of emergency and seize ballots. There's a bill the Republicans are pushing in Congress that would make it. You would have to show proof of citizenship to vote, and this is despite the fact that less than half Americans have passports. So they say you have to bring your birth certificate, and it has to match your current name. Well, that's going to be a problem, obviously, for most married women. Women tend to vote Democratic in much higher numbers than Republicans. Obviously, for trans people, that who are also overwhelmingly Democrat, they would essentially be disenfranchised. I mean, there could be all sorts of complications here. So this is really going to be the big test in terms of American democracy. Whether our democracy survives. Because left alone, it'll be a huge Democratic victory. And knowing that, the Trump administration and its supporters in Congress and in the courts could go all out to try to prevent a fair election from taking place.
This wouldn't be the first time that class and race have been used this way. It's used since the 1870s in the South to support what became single-party states.
I think the analogy is good, again, because so much of this stuff going on is on racial lines. That people with Hispanic names are often singled out to have their ballots challenged, or Black Americans, given the racial bias in the judicial system. There are higher numbers of felons, and in most U.S. states, felons aren't allowed to vote. So if you have the same name as a felon, you can't, and you're Black, there's a Jesus chant. They'll try to disenfranchise you that way as well. So there are all sorts of ways of making it difficult for minorities and others to vote. Texas recently passed a law that said you need some kind of official ID, and they said that gun registration IDs will count, but student IDs from state universities will not. Well, gun owners are more likely to vote Republican than university students who tend to vote Democratic. But so there's all these ways, that they're really trying. They're pulling the stops out to tilt the election in their favor.
What happens? What will the Democrats do? What will happen in the country and to the country if it becomes very clear that the election's purposely being corrupted, and it looks like they might succeed?
Well, I'd like to see, what happened in Serbia, in the Philippines, in Ukraine, and in other places where there were, flagrant attempts, by the incumbent party to steal the election, and there have a massive civil insurrection. But in order to do that, you need to combine forces of grassroots organizing and the official opposition. And the Democratic leadership is notorious for its insistence on working through institutions, no matter how corrupted they might be. And indeed, the party leaders, Chuck Schumer in the Senate and Hakeem Jeffries in the House, I mean, they're the butt of constant jokes and political cartoons about just how incredibly wimpy they are and challenging, what is going on. And so I think that kind of the kind of resistance that is necessary will be hard to pull off, unless we had a party leadership that was more assertive and more willing to, frankly, take to the streets, or at least encourage others to do so.
The leader of the Senate, what state's he from again?
They're both from New York. And just, I guess, you gave you an idea just about how extreme how out of touch he is. I mean, he not only was a big supporter of Netanyahu, big supporter of the Iraq War, that kind of thing. He refused to even endorse the Democratic nominee for mayor in his own city, Zoran Amdami, because he was a Democratic socialist. And so, yeah, I really can't imagine that he will be the kind of person to lead the resistance.
Is he up for re-election, or either of them up for re-election?
Hakeem Jeffries in the House,
yes.
As a member of the House of Representatives, they're up for re-election every 2 years. He doesn't have any serious challenge. And Chuck Schumer isn't up for a re-election. They have 6-year terms for another a couple of years. But I suspect that if we end up having a Democratic wave in November, and we get a lot of newer, younger, more progressive Democrats in, there could be something of a rebellion within the House, for a stronger, more progressive leadership that could spread to the Senate. That would either force an election to get new within these caucuses to get new leadership, or at least scare the current leaders enough that they will be forced to embrace more progressive positions themselves.
Well, what bothers me, it seems to me it'd be a lot easier for the population to insist on a non-corrupt election before it happened than if the Trump administration was able to assert itself after an election they won, even if they won it unfairly.
Sorry, I missed that.
What my worry is that if the administration wages an unfair, corrupt election, which is possible, and they succeed, it'll be harder to oppose them than it would be to oppose them before the election.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, if they get away with that, they feel they can get away with anything. Yeah, I think you're right on target there.
Does that mean we have to actually work for and struggle for democracy or lose it?
Oh, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think Americans, because we have this, very strong constitution, which for its time was the most progressive in the world. And we've kind of we trust the system to work. That yes, there is obviously unfairness, like any capitalist society. Those with money, have a disproportionate influence. And as an imperial power, we will sometimes violate international legal norms. But even people who acknowledge all this, there's always a sense that at least we'll have democracy. At least we can still work within the system to, create change gradually over time. At least we won't, that our democracy is safe. Our institutions are sound. And for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, and quite a number of generations before me. This is really in serious question. Historically, United States has become more democratic, more inclusive, more progressive over time. First Amendment protections of civil liberties have expanded, and this is the first time we have seen this kind of major reversal, and that's what's scary about the time we are in. I mean, ever since my activist college days, I've certainly had critiques, including some fairly radical critiques of the system, but I did not worry about at least having some semblance of liberal democracy here in the United States, and now I genuinely am.
This is to some extent happening internationally. You look at Hungary, look at what might happen in France and other places, and it seems to me that in some ways neoliberalism and the kind of inequality that we have is actually destructive of democracy and makes democracy much more fragile. That it isn't. We can't separate economic inequality and the power of the wealthy from the threat to democracy.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, there have been books and some very good analysis out there that links directly the rise of neoliberalism and the decline of democracy. That when people, we saw, before we started seeing the decline of democracy, we started seeing the decline of greater equity, greater equality, greater social justice. The welfare state, social democracy was expanding, and starting with Thatcher and Reagan in the 80s, and institutionalized, by Tony Blair and Bill Clinton, these and frankly, some of your even some labor leaders in New Zealand, they've kind of institutionalized this neoliberal order that has given less hope to people to have financial stability, to have or even basic affordability, and to and get some of their basic needs and hopes for themselves and their children. And when you are losing that, people tend to find scapegoats. So whether they be immigrants or LGBTQ people or whomever, and it is a ripe environment, where the far right can take advantage of that, because if we don't,
the roots of fascism.
Yeah, exactly. If we don't have economic democracy, if a handful of powerful corporations and unelected international financial institutions like the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, et cetera, get to make the decisions that really directly impact people's lives, is it any surprise that the downfall of democratic political institutions will follow.
Well, thanks a lot, Stephen Zunes. We've been talking with Stephen Zunes, a professor of political studies and international law and foreign affairs from San Francisco University. We appreciate you coming on and giving us your time and yourself to this important question.
Thanks again for inviting me.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.